ceremony. As Nick says, I'm Nigel Hancock, Chair of the Cricket Society. I'm also administrator of this award on behalf of both the Cricket Society and MCC. We normally have the event in a long room, a quite famous one up there at Lord's. This time it's rather different, and we're zooming to hundreds of Zoom rooms all over the globe, not just in Europe, but at least 2 other continents I'm aware of. So welcome to you all. Not many ties I expect on tonight. I expect. Now, the judges have been busy, and they've not only selecting the winner of this competition, which in fact was decided a while ago, but has been delayed because of the COVID pandemic, but they've been looking at the shortlist for the 2021 competition. That's for books published in 2020. And we're going to be announcing that. And at the very end, Neil Robinson of MCC will tell us about the provisional plans for making the 2021 awards. Particular welcomes to our authors on the shortlist announced last July. You'll hear from them in person soon, and they'll each be introduced by a judge, or in one case by me. Welcome to their publishers. They're from Little Brown, Michael Joseph, Hodder and Stoughton, Oxford University Press, Allen and Unwin, and the History Press. There are other publishers here too tonight, I think, including Pitch Publishing, who have 7 of the 21 books in the frame for the 2021 award shortlist announcement. We also have a special surprise guest who will be announcing the outcome in about half an hour or so's time. She or he, I'm not saying who it is, will probably be searching now frantically for that magic envelope to reveal the outcome of the competition. There was a more famous envelope once at Lord's. A winner was so excited at winning, he didn't realize that there was money involved, and he threw away the envelope with the check into the dustbins at Lord's. And as far as I know, they're still there. To the audience, welcome, mainly members from both organizations, I suspect, with a lot from MCC. The last time I looked, we didn't have a waiting list for Cricket Society. So if you're interested in joining us, go over to cricketsociety.com and details await. Welcome also to those of you who are following this event on social media. There are 1 or 2 Twitter feeds. There'll be a recording of the event, which will be held by both MCC and the Cricket Society. So you'll be able to catch up there. And I think clips may even be available on Twitter account of Cricket Society later on, and in a day or 3 on our Cricket Society YouTube account. And finally, welcome to our Chair of Judges, Robert Winder, and his team, who Robert will introduce later. Just a brief history of the competition. It started in 1970 when David Frith's My Dear Victoria Stodd, a biography of A.E. Stoddart, took the inaugural prize. David is a 3 times winner. Mike Brearley, E.W. Swanton, and Alan Hill are 2 times winners. Other writers such as Gideon Hay, Chris Waters, and Stephen Chalk from the list of prominent current writers have also won the competition. A full list is normally in our programme. You can find that again on cricketsociety.com. The award is in partnership with MCC, and we've had this arrangement since I think 2009. So we're well into the 2nd decade of our partnership, which shows no sign of discontinuing. Tonight's event is emceed by Robert Winder, Chair of Judges. Robert is former literary editor of The Independent, author of several books, including 2 cricket books. One of them, The Little Wonder, The Remarkable History of Wisden, was published in 2013 and was on the shortlist for this competition. So he will have some idea of how this early spring evening, at least in England, shortlisted writers will be feeling now. Robert, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you very much to the wonderful judges who've read so many books so earnestly and discussed them so heatedly and well in the course of this last year. And thanks finally to the MCC and the Cricket Society for sponsoring this lovely prize and for being here tonight. I mean, it's conventional on an evening like this to thank you all for, daring and braving the inclement weather to be with us here tonight. This is rather the other way around. I have to thank you for ignoring the gorgeous weather outside and staying in your sitting rooms. And some of you I know have come from as far away as your kitchen to be here. And so it's a marvelous effort by everyone, and it's great to have you all. Now at this point, of course, I wish I really was a cricketing Galactico full of wonderful exploits from my first-class past, which I could be falsely modest about. I wish I could tell you about the time I made my debut at Lord's and like an idiot was out first ball trying to hook Brett Lee, played too early as usual. And all the time in Trinidad when I was brought on to bowl and over before lunch at Brian Lara when he was on 99 and going for his 100th 100, as I say, in Port of Spain. And he caught a little leading edge, and well, no one was more surprised than me when I clung onto it. But I don't really have any stories like that, I'm afraid. So I will just share one anecdote, which was told me the other day by a friend from the Foreign Office. So if any of you work for the Foreign Office, you may have heard this. It has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with cricket, I'm afraid, but it has the advantage of being a true story. It concerns the time when Donald Trump became president. And if you remember, some of us were a bit taken aback, but we weren't too worried because we'd seen the West Wing. We knew that the White House was full of brilliant, well-intentioned people. And although Trump himself was a little bit of a bull in a china shop, there was a limit to how much damage he could do, really, how many windows he might break, because he had this terrific staff. And at first it seemed as though we were right to think that. In fact, one of the first things they did was take him aside and say they had a routine in the Oval Office to establish the credentials of any visitor. And they said, this is how it works. You point them at this framed mirror with a riddle on it, and they have to read the riddle and see if they can solve it. And you can tell by how quickly they solve it, how clever they are. And so it's a useful little shortcut. And they explained to Trump how it worked in great detail, and he really liked it, so he thought he'd give it a try. And if you remember, the very first visitor racing across the Atlantic from here to see him was our own beloved Boris Johnson, and he rushed over to compare hairstyles and cement the special relationship. And he was ushered in, and Trump said, well, would you mind awfully doing this thing? Well, would you mind awfully? That sounds more like Boris. It might not have been Trump's actual words. But he explained to him how it worked, and Boris thought, well, crikey. But, give it the old college try. So he stood in front of the frame, and he read the riddle, which went, brothers and sisters have I none, but this man's father is my father's son. Who am I? And he smiled immediately and said, well, that's quite easy. It's me. And Trump was very impressed by how quick he'd been. And so they went out into the Rose Garden and they put the world to rights. They talked about building that wall in the Mexican border or the Irish Sea or wherever it should have best been. And everything went very well. And a few days later, Trump's own Secretary of State came to visit. If you remember, it was a slightly delayed appointment. Rex Tillerson, great oil magnate, very serious man. And he was asked to play the same game, and he wasn't delighted by it, a bit old for games, but he had to do it. And so he stood in front of the frame and he read the riddle, brothers and sisters have I none, but this man's father is my father's son. Who am I? And he frowned, trying to puzzle it out. And then he smiled and he said, oh, I get it, it's me. And Trump said, no, 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 it's Boris Johnson. And well, when I say that's a true story, it might not be. But when we judges met a year ago, or just over a year ago at Lord's, in the lovely library overlooking the pitch, I suppose, as always, those were the kind of things we were looking for. Familiar characters with an element of surprise, something new, a bit of humor, a twist. And as always, in my short experience of this prize, we were spoiled for choice. It was an extensive waterfront, and there were an awful lot of good books. Of course, there were player autobiographies of Jimmy Anderson, John Murray, Robin Smith, and they were all different. Jimmy Anderson's was very chirpy and all about what songs he listened to in the car on the way to matches. Robin Smith's was much more troubled about his difficulties he had with drink and mental health. And John Murray's was more a portrait of a paragon, really. all of them suffered, I suppose, in our eyes from the slight disadvantage. This prize has historically not smiled on ghosted player autobiographies, just because I suppose they have sometimes seemed like merchandising more than writing, and the judges have always wanted really to reward writing. Of course, it's not an absolute rule, and there are some brilliant ghosted autobiographies, and there always have been. Then there were some county histories. There was one of Durham, a good one. There was a good one of Warwickshire. Again, it's quite hard for those books to get onto a shortlist, however good they are, because the audience is necessarily quite circumscribed, quite niche. I mean, for the right people, it's a perfect book, but perhaps not for the general reader always. But there was a wide range of other things. There was a story of a cricket painting, one of the famous paintings hanging at Lord's about the Kent-Lancashire match. Blythe bowling to Tildesley. There was the recollections of a distinguished cricket publisher. There were all kinds of, there were some instant books about England's incredible World Cup win. And we, I remember, quite thought we ought really to have one of those on the shortlist, just because what a story, what a sensational event it had been. And we were still all quite caught up in it. Having not put those books on the shortlist, I think a year later, looking back, it's a nice reminder that nothing really dates faster than the immediate and the topical and the timely. Because now it would seem odder, really, to reflect on that triumph. It would be almost as if we were banging on about it. But anyway, none of these books quite made it on the shortlist. But through all of them came the life of cricket, the commercial life, the social life, the tactics of the game, and the personalities. And of course, there was a flood of anecdotes dribbling out of all the books, enough to keep us all, you know, drinking and lying late into the night. I think my favorite of the anecdotes that came out of last year was in a very nice autobiography by Fred Rumsey, the fast bowler from the 1960s, if you remember. And when he was picked to play for England in London, I think it was Lord's, might have been the Oval, but I think it was Lord's, he was sharing a room with Jeff Boycott. It's lucky for some, perhaps not for others. Anyway, he was surprised once when Boycott came back to the room, and Fred Rumsey had a woman in the room, later to be his wife. And of course, Boycott, as any, you know, good-humoured and sociable and considerate roommate would do, reported him to the authorities. Quite an astonishing thing to do, it seems. But anyway, that's what he did. And so poor old Fred Rumsey was hauled up in front of the beak and given a dressing down by, I think it was then Ken Barrington in those days. And he was told off for this indiscretion and had to apologise. And when it was all over, Barrington said, well, of course, in my day, when I grew up, batsmen were allowed women in the room. Bowlers were only allowed beer. And quick as a flash, Fred Rumsey said, well, it's a good job then that I consider myself an all-rounder. So all of this kind of, not fun necessarily, but just the charm of cricket came through so many of the books. But we were left with 6 as we diligently panned our way to the final 6 books, to the final 6 nuggets. And we were left with 6. And now we'll come to the main event of the evening, where each of those 6 writers will ask to say a few words. It's on the principle really that everyone must get a bat. And I think it's been outlined how this will work. And of course, this is a bit of a first for everyone doing this on Zoom. We hope everyone is available, muting and unmuting at the correct time. But I'm a little bit reminded, I apologize in advance if anything goes wrong, I'm a little bit reminded, I read a charming thing the other day by a chief executive of some company, I can't remember which one, who said he was getting very weary of Zoom and all the silences and stilted moments that seem to happen on Zoom. And he said one of the things he'd noticed that it was impossible to do on Zoom, that he'd previously obviously very much enjoyed, was interrupting. A very hard thing to do on Zoom. So taking my cue from that, it would be awfully helpful in the next half hour or so if you could stop talking while I'm interrupting. And we'll try and take these authors one by one, and we'll go in alphabetical